For 18 years I trusted my husband unconditionally, until I saw him pouring powder into my ravioli in an Italian restaurant. At that moment I realized that he was not just cheating, he wanted to kill me. Welcome to the Twists of Fate channel. Before we begin, write where you are watching us from. We are very interested in this. We wish you a pleasant listening to this fascinating story. Tatiana stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom, holding a black dress in her hands and mentally calculating whether it was suitable for the evening. Igor had returned from a business trip only yesterday, and they had not really had time to talk. He immediately fell asleep, citing fatigue. In the 2 weeks of his absence, she had gotten used to the silence in the house, to the fact that she could watch her programs on TV and not cook a full dinner. 18 years of marriage had accustomed her to a certain rhythm, and each separation, even a short one, forced her to get used to each other again. She ran her hand over the fabric of her dress. The last time they went to a restaurant together, it seemed, for her sister's birthday 3 months ago, and then more out of duty. Igor always said that they cooked better at home. Why overpay for something you can make yourself? So his call today was a pleasant surprise. The phone rang around 3 p.m. Tatiana was just hanging out the laundry on the balcony, enjoying the spring sun. Tanechka, hi. Igor's voice sounded a little tense, but she wrote it off to work. Listen, let's go out to dinner somewhere, to a restaurant today. To a restaurant? She even squinted in surprise, although he couldn't see it. What happened? Nothing happened. I just missed you. I'd like to note that I came back to spend time together. Remember how it used to be? There was something like nostalgia in his voice, and Tatiana felt a slight warmth in her chest. Indeed, they had often had such evenings before. In the first years of their marriage, Igor would come home unexpectedly with a bouquet of flowers and announce that they were going out to dinner tonight at a new place he had noticed on the way home from work. Okay, she smiled. Where shall we go? I've already made reservations in Tuscany for 7 p.m. Remember that place? We celebrated our 10th anniversary there. Of course she remembered. A cozy Italian restaurant in the city center, where soft music played and the waiters spoke with a slight accent. Then they would sit by the window, and Igor would hold her hand on the table, telling her how happy he was and how grateful he was to fate that they were together. Great. What time shall we meet? Let's do it at 6:30. I'll come straight from work. After the conversation, Tatiana felt a pleasant excitement that she hadn't felt for a long time. Maybe the business trip had done Igor good, and he had realized how important their family was. In recent years, he spent more and more time at work at a pharmaceutical company, where he held the position of regional manager. He came home late, tired, and their conversations were limited to everyday matters and plans for the weekend. She chose a black dress, the same one that Igor had once called his favorite. It emphasized her figure, which Tatiana kept in good shape thanks to regular visits to the gym. At 40, she looked attractive, and her friends often said that time was kind to her. She styled her hair in waves, just as Igor liked, applied subtle makeup and chose shoes with a small heel. On the way to the restaurant, she thought that perhaps they could return to the closeness that was at the beginning of their relationship. They never had children. At first they postponed, then the doctors said that the chances were minimal, and Igor categorically did not agree to artificial insemination. If it is meant to be, it will be, he said then. Tatiana had been sensitive to the topic for the first few years, but she had come to terms with it and focused on her career at the design studio and her relationship with her husband. There were enough people in Tuscany for a Thursday night, but not so loud as to interfere with conversation. Igor was already sitting at the table by the window, the same one where they had celebrated their anniversary. He stood up when he saw her and kissed her on the cheek. She smelled of his usual cologne, but there was something tense in his movements. You look so beautiful, he said, helping her sit up. That dress suits you very well. Thank you, she smiled and looked at him more closely. Igor was still an attractive man, tall, slim, with thick dark hair that had only recently begun to gray at the temples. But today he seemed somehow anxious. The waiter brought the menu, and they ordered wine, the bottle of Chianti they had had last time. Igor chose lasagna. Tatiana settled on the mushroom ravioli. A familiar dish, a familiar setting, but something was wrong. Tell me how your business trip went, she asked when the waiter had left. Usually meetings, negotiations, new contracts. He drank the wine a little faster than usual. He was tired, of course. 2 cities in 2 weeks, constant travel. And where exactly had he been? Many places. He hesitated for a second, as if remembering. A new representative office was opening there. Everything needed to be organized. Tatiana nodded, but noticed that Igor was avoiding eye contact and periodically glancing at his phone. Over the years of marriage, she had learned to read his mood in small details, and now she felt that he was hiding something important. Igor finished his wine and poured himself another, although he usually limited himself to 1 glass at dinner. Tatiana watched him and understood that something was definitely wrong. Over the 18 years of their life together, she had studied his every gesture, every intonation, and now everything was saying that her husband was nervous. And how are things at work? Is everything okay with the new contracts? She asked, trying to get him to talk. Yes, everything is fine, he quickly answered and was immediately distracted by the phone, which vibrated on the table. Looking at the screen, he frowned and turned the device face down. Work matters, but Tatiana managed to notice that a woman's name appeared on the screen. Ina. She did not remember her husband mentioning a colleague with that name, although he rarely talked about employees in detail. Quote, "Who was that calling?" She asked as innocently as possible. Kolga, about work. Igor again avoided direct eye contact and began to study the restaurant's interior as if he was seeing it for the first time. The phone rang again. This time Igor quickly rejected the call, but Tatiana saw the same name on the screen again. An unpleasant feeling began to creep into her soul. Why was her colleague calling so persistently on a Thursday evening, and why was Igor reacting so nervously? Maybe she should answer? What if it was urgent, she suggested. No, nothing important. We'll figure it out tomorrow. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and tried to smile. Let's talk about us instead. I missed you so much, our evenings. The words were correct, but they sounded somehow strained. Tatiana tried to push away the suspicion and focus on the fact that her husband really wanted to spend time with her. Quote, I missed you too, she said sincerely. The house seems so empty without you. Even coffee in the morning is not the same when you drink it alone. Igor nodded, but his gaze darted around the restaurant, as if he was expecting someone or, on the contrary, was afraid to meet someone. He reached for his glass of wine again, and Tatiana noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. Igor, are you feeling okay? Maybe you're tired from the road? No, everything is fine. He tried to pull himself together and finally looked at her. Just a lot of impressions over the past 2 weeks. You know how it happens after business trips? The waiter brought their order. Igor's lasagna looked delicious. Layers of dough, meat and cheese under a golden crust. Tatiana's ravioli were also beautifully served with a sprig of basil and grated parmesan. Quote, Wow, how beautiful! She smiled, trying to ease the atmosphere. I haven't eaten Italian food for so long. Yes, they always cook great here, Igor agreed, but he remained nervous. He insisted that she sit in this very place. Opposite him, with her back to the entrance. He said that it was more romantic this way, that he wanted to admire her. But now Tatiana understood that perhaps there were other reasons. He wanted to control who entered the restaurant, and she should not see it. Let's try. Igor took a fork, but instead of starting to eat, he suddenly stood up. Oh, I forgot to take napkins. He headed to the counter where there were extra napkins, but Tatiana noticed that he took them from the next table. When he returned, he somehow managed to stand so that his body blocked her plate from view. Quote, "Is everything okay?" she asked. "Yes, of course." Quote, he fussily straightened the napkin on his knees. And at that moment Tatiana saw how his right hand quickly poured something into her plate with ravioli. The movement was very fast, but she managed to notice a small packet, which he immediately hid in the napkin. Her heart sank. The white powder dissolved in the sauce almost instantly, leaving no trace. If she had not been looking at that moment, she would never have noticed. "What was that?" she asked, trying to maintain a calm tone. "What?" Igor sat down and took a fork, pretending not to understand anything. "You poured something into my plate. What makes you think that?" "I was just getting a napkin." He tried to laugh, but the laughter came out unnatural. "Tanechka, are you imagining something?" But his hands were shaking even more, and sweat appeared on his forehead. Despite the fact that it was cool in the restaurant, Tatiana felt a chill spread through her body. Could her husband, with whom she had lived for almost 20 years, really do it? "Let's eat before it gets cold," Igor said and demonstratively put a piece of lasagna into his mouth. Tatiana looked at her plate and couldn't bring herself to pick up a fork. The ravioli looked just as appetizing as before. The sauce was the usual color, but she had definitely seen her husband add something. "You're not eating," Igor noted, and his voice sounded impatient. "Don't like it?" "No, everything is fine, I'm just admiring it." She picked up a fork but didn't stab the ravioli. "And you continue telling me about the business trip, what interesting people there were, meetings." Quote. Igor clearly relaxed, seeing that she was not eating, and began to tell some story about negotiations with new partners. But Tatiana was barely listening. Scary thoughts were spinning in her head. Why did her husband need to put something in her food? What was it? And most importantly, why? The phone in his pocket vibrated again. This time Igor did not even take it out, but from the way he tensed up, it was clear that the calls were continuing. "Are you sure you don't need to answer?" Tatiana asked. "Maybe it really is something important?" "No," he answered sharply, and then softened. "What do you mean?" "No, thank you. Today is just our evening, just you and me." Quote. But his eyes continued to run around the room, and his gaze constantly slid to the front door of the restaurant. Tatiana was still pondering what she had seen when the door of the restaurant swung open and a woman entered, tall, slender, with long chestnut hair, styled in a perfect hairstyle. She was wearing an elegant beige coat, from under which a white dress was visible. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, and she moved with the confidence that betrays a person accustomed to attention. Igor turned his head sharply, hearing the sound of the opening door, and his face instantly changed. First, relief flashed, then anxiety, and then something like panic. The woman looked around, and her gaze stopped at their table. A smile appeared on the stranger's face, an impolite smile of a casual acquaintance, and something more intimate. "Excuse me," she approached their table, and Tatiana felt a light aroma of expensive French perfume. "Igor, what a surprise to meet you here." The woman's voice was pleasant, slightly hoarse, with a barely noticeable accent. Igor stood up so abruptly that he almost knocked over his glass of wine. "Ina, hi." He was clearly confused and did not know how to behave. "What is it? What do you mean, how are you?" So this is the same Ina who had been calling all evening. Tatiana studied the woman carefully, and her intuition told her that there was something more than a working relationship between this stranger and her husband. They looked at each other too familiarly, they behaved too tensely. "Sorry to disturb you," Ina turned to Tatiana with a polite smile. "My name is Ina Lebedeva. I work with your husband. Igor, don't you remember? You promised to give me the documents for the contract. I called, but you didn't answer. Give me the documents." Igor ran his hand through his hair. The gesture that Tatiana knew it as a sign of his great excitement. They are in my car, I will run now. There is no need to worry, Tatiana interrupted him, carefully observing the reaction of both of them. Ina, please sit down with us. Since you are here, let's get to know each other better. The offer clearly caught both Igor and Ina off guard. The husband tried to object. Tanechka, we are having a romantic dinner. We do not want to disturb anyone. Quote, oh, what are you saying, no disturbing. Tatiana stood up and moved a free chair to their table. Ina, please sit down. Igor talks so little about work, and I am interested in learning about his colleagues. Confusion flashed in Ina's eyes, but it would be impolite to refuse. She took off her coat. Under it was indeed a white dress, emphasizing her chiseled figure, and sat down at the table. Thank you for your hospitality, she said. I really didn't want to disturb you, but the documents are very urgent. Tomorrow morning there is a meeting with Japanese partners. How hard you work on Thursday evening, Tatiana noted, continuing to study the woman. Ina was truly beautiful, with regular features, impeccable makeup, and expensive jewelry. But most of all, Tatiana was wary of the look with which Ina looked at Igor. Too knowledgeable, too intimate for ordinary colleagues. The pharmaceutical business knows no days off, Ina smiled. Especially when you work with international contracts. Igor sat on pins and needles, constantly shifting his gaze from his wife to Ina and back. It was obvious that the situation had gotten out of his control. How long have you been working together? Tatiana asked, pouring Ina some water from a decanter. About 6 months, Ina answered, and Tatiana noticed how she quickly glanced at Igor, as if checking with him. I came to the company as an international relations specialist. I wonder if you travel together on business trips? There was an awkward pause. Ina looked at Igor again, but he was studying the contents of his glass. Sometimes, she answered cautiously. When my participation in negotiations is required. Tatiana nodded, mentally noting every detail. Half the time, Ina looked at Igor, the other half she avoided his gaze. Classic behavior of people who have a secret between them. And where do you live, Ina? Far from here? Quote. Tatiana continued asking. In the center, not far, I have an apartment there. Quote. Ina was clearly nervous under the gun of questions. And you, probably, have been married to Igor for a long time? 18 years old, Tatiana answered, not taking her eyes off her interlocutor's face. We practically grew up together. You know, over so many years you study a person down to the smallest detail, every gesture, every intonation. The last phrase was said with a special subtext, and Ina understood it. A slight blush appeared on her cheeks. That's wonderful, she muttered. And rare these days. The waiter came up to the table and asked if the new guests would like to order anything. No, thank you, I'm not long, Ina answered hastily. Oh, come on, you should definitely order something, Tatiana insisted. Igor, tell me, Ina, how delicious the lasagna is here. You ordered it. Igor choked on his wine and started coughing. When he calmed down, he said, yes, the lasagna is really good. But maybe Ina is in a hurry. I'm in no hurry, Ina said unexpectedly. And Tatiana felt that the woman had decided to accept the challenge. I'll order lasagna, as you recommend. Excellent, Tatiana smiled. In the meantime, I'll try my ravioli. She picked up a fork and speared one of the ravioli, but didn't put it in her mouth. Instead, she got up from the table. Excuse me, I'll go to the house room to freshen up a bit. As she walked through the hall, she heard a quiet but clearly tense conversation between Igor and Ina begin behind her. The words were indistinct, but the intonations spoke for themselves. They were clearly discussing the current situation. In the toilet, Tatiana splashed cold water on her wrist and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with determination. She finally understood what was happening. Igor was cheating on her with this other woman, and had been for quite a while, judging by their behavior, and the fact that he had put something in her food, Tatiana didn't even want to think about it, but the facts formed a terrible picture. When she returned to the table, the waiter had just brought Ina lasagna, exactly the same as Igor's. Both interlocutors fell silent upon seeing it. Quote, "Well, did I miss a lot?" Tatiana asked, sitting down. "No, we were discussing work matters," Igor answered. But his voice sounded unnatural. Ina picked up a fork and was about to try the lasagna, but Tatiana suddenly remembered her ravioli with the suspicious powder. Quote, "Ina, let's swap," she suggested. "I suddenly wanted lasagna, and you try ravioli. They say they cook them here using a special recipe." "Why swap?" Igor quickly intervened. "Each has their own dish. Come on, what's the problem?" Tatiana was already holding out her plate. "Ina, we're all friends here." Ina hesitated, but it would be strange to refuse. She handed her lasagna to Tatiana and took the plate with ravioli. "Thank you," she said. "I really wanted to try ravioli at this restaurant for a long time." Igor sat there thunderstruck, watching Ina take a fork and stab ravioli first. His face turned deathly pale. Tatiana felt the adrenaline rush through her veins. A plan formed in her head instantly, as soon as she saw the horror in Igor's eyes as Ina prepared to eat her ravioli. But she had to act carefully, so as not to arouse suspicion. "Igor, my dear," she said in the most natural tone. "Do you remember, we wanted to ask about the wine list? After all, they have that bagale we drank last time." Wine list. He clearly didn't understand what she was talking about. "Well, yes, you wanted to order something special, Klanya. Go to the administrator, ask to see the full wine list, and not just what is written on the menu." Igor sat motionless, staring intently at the plate of ravioli in Ina's hands. It was clear that he was torn between the desire to stay and control the situation and the impossibility of refusing his wife without arousing even more suspicion. Quote, "Maybe later?" he muttered. "This wine is enough for me." "Oh, come on, we were going to make the evening special," Tatiana insisted, leaning across the table and placing her hand on his. "Ina, do you mind waiting a little?" Igor quickly. "Of course I don't mind," Ina nodded, but it was clear that she too felt the tension in the air. Quote, "And also ask for additional appetizers," Tatiana added. "Something light, cheese, maybe olives." Igor realized that it would be suspicious to resist any longer. He reluctantly got up from the table, but before moving away, he paused and looked at Ina. Quote, "Maybe Ina would like to order something special too?" He tried in his last attempt to stay. No, this is enough for me," Ina quickly answered and, as if demonstrating this, picked up a fork with a speared ravioli. "Then go, dear," Tatiana said softly but insistently. "We'll have a chat with someone here, get to know each other better." Igor slowly walked towards the reception desk, but turned around every few steps, trying to see their table. Tatiana watched him go and made sure he was far enough away. Quote, "You know, Ina," she began the conversation, carefully making sure her voice sounded friendly. "It seemed to me that you and Igor understand each other very well." "Yes, we have developed a working relationship," Ina answered. But it was clear that she was becoming wary. Tatiana saw how Igor was nervously gesturing at the reception desk and constantly looking back in their direction. The receptionist was explaining something to him, showing him a folder with a wine list, but it was obvious that Igor's attention was completely focused on their table. Quote, "Tell me about your last business trip," Tatiana asked, trying to engage Ina in conversation. Igor said that they had very interesting partners there. "Yes, the project really has potential," Ina began to tell, while automatically stabbing the ravioli. "We work with a large distribution network that covers the entire country. Do you often go there to see these partners?" "Several times a month. Sometimes with Igor, sometimes alone." Ina brought the fork with ravioli to her mouth, but at that moment Igor returned. What happened?" he muttered, looking at Ina with a fork in her hand. And what was supposed to happen? Tatiana asked innocently. We were just chatting. Ina was telling me about the business trip. Igor literally collapsed on a chair. I rubbed his forehead. His hands were shaking so much that he couldn't pick up a glass of wine. Is everything okay, darling? Asked Tatiana, watching her husband with cold curiosity. It's like you've seen a ghost. I don't feel well, he whispered. It seems like my blood pressure has risen. Maybe some fresh air? Suggested Ina with sincere concern. Or some pill? No, Igor exclaimed sharply, and then added, Quiet, thank you, it will pass in a minute. Ina shrugged her shoulders and went back to eating. She speared one ravioli and put it in her mouth. She chewed it thoroughly and swallowed. Then she took the next one. Very tasty, she said. Really, it was worth trying. Igor sat, not taking his eyes off her plate. Every time Ina brought her fork to her mouth, he shuddered, as if from an electric shock. And what about the wine list? Asked Tatiana. Did you find the Ozhale? What? He switched to her question with difficulty. What about wine? Yes, there is. But I think what we have already ordered will be enough. As you wish, Tatiana agreed and turned to Ina. Do you have a family? A husband, children? Not yet, Ina answered, continuing to eat. Career is in first place for now. And children? Maybe later. I understand. I once thought so too. Tatiana glanced at Igor, but life often presents surprises. What seems important today may turn out to be an illusion tomorrow. Ina finished half of her lasagna and put her fork down. I'm full, she said. The portions here are big. Yes, eat up, Tatiana insisted. It's somehow awkward. No, I really have enough. Ina looked at her watch. And I still need my documents. Igor, maybe we should go to the car? We can't now, he quickly answered. That is, let's finish our wine first and sit quietly. His behavior was becoming increasingly strange, and Ina began to notice it. Quote, Igor, are you sure you're feeling okay? She asked. Should I call a doctor? No, he exclaimed so loudly that the neighboring tables turned to look at them. Everything was fine, he's just tired. Tatiana watched the unfolding drama in silence. Her plan was working, but what she saw in her husband's behavior surpassed all her worst fears. It was obvious that he expected some consequences from eating other food. And judging by his reaction, these consequences must be serious. About 20 minutes had passed since Ina had eaten half of the ravioli. Tatiana kept sneaking glances at her watch, and Igor sat there tense as a string, not taking his eyes off Ina. The conversation was not going well. All three of them felt the growing tension, although Ina did not yet understand the cause. Quote, You know, Ina said, looking at her watch again. I really have to go. I have to get up early tomorrow, and the documents. Sit a little longer, Tatiana asked, carefully studying the woman's face. It was so rare to get to know Igor's colleagues. Ina nodded and reached for a glass of water, but suddenly froze halfway. Her face distorted slightly, and she pressed her hand to her stomach. She muttered something strange. She must have eaten too quickly. Igor leaned forward sharply. His eyes widened in horror. Quote, What exactly do you feel? He asked. And there was such alarm in his voice that Ina looked at him in surprise. Some kind of nausea. She pressed her hand to her stomach again. And her head was spinning a little. She must have overworked herself this week. Tatiana felt a chill spreading down her back. So her suspicions were confirmed. Igor had indeed put something in Ina's food, and now this substance was affecting her. Quote, Would you like a drink of water? Tatiana suggested, trying to maintain a calm tone, although inside she was writhing in horror at the realization. Yes, thank you. Ina took the glass, but her hands were noticeably shaking. It was strange, she hadn't eaten anything special. She took a few sips, but the water didn't seem to help. On the contrary, the nausea intensified, and her complexion began to change. The healthy blush was replaced by an unhealthy pallor. "Ina, how are you?" Igor leaned toward her, and Tatiana noticed that horror and some strange anticipation were fighting in his eyes. "I feel bad," Ina whispered. "Very bad. I think I've been poisoned by something." She tried to get up, but immediately sank back into her chair, clutching the edge of the table. Her face became waxy. Cold sweat appeared on her forehead. "Igor," her voice sounded weak. "What's happening to me? Everything is swimming before my eyes." Instead of answering, Igor rushed to her, supported her by the arm, but Tatiana noticed that his movements were somehow mechanical, as if he was playing the role of a caring colleague, and not acting on the dictates of his heart. Quote, right now, he muttered. "I must have eaten something wrong. It happens, something wrong." Ina had difficulty focusing her gaze on him. "But I ate the same thing as you. I'm coming from the same restaurant." Tatiana saw how Igor was momentarily confused. He clearly did not expect Ina to analyze the situation while in such a state. Quote, "Perhaps an allergic reaction," he said quickly. "Or fatigue. You said you worked a lot, but it wasn't getting worse." She bent over, pressing both hands to her stomach, and froze in pain. "It hurts," she squeezed out. "It really hurts." As if something was burning from the inside. Several customers at the neighboring tables turned around, hearing the groan. The waiter approached their table, looking worried. "Has something happened? Is there anything I can do?" "The lady is not feeling well," Tatiana answered. "Perhaps she needs medical attention." "No," Igor intervened sharply. "That is, we'll see now, maybe it will go away on its own." But it didn't get any worse. She was shaking slightly. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. She tried to get up to go to the toilet, but her legs wouldn't hold her up. Igor supported her, but Tatiana noticed that he was doing it reluctantly, as if he were performing an unpleasant duty. "I need to go to the hospital," Ina whispered. "Something is very, very bad." "Of course," dear Tatiana stood up and turned to the waiter. "Please call an ambulance. Immediately." "Maybe we shouldn't," quote, Igor began, but Tatiana interrupted him. "There she is. You see how bad she is." The waiter nodded and hurried to the phone. There was a commotion in the restaurant. Other customers also noticed that something serious was happening. Ina suddenly turned even paler and grabbed her throat. "I can't breathe," she croaked. "My throat is constricting." These were symptoms of a mild case of food poisoning. Tatiana understood that what Igor had added was something much more dangerous. Her heart was pounding with horror, horror from the realization of what the man she had lived with for 18 years was capable of. Ina turned her head towards him with difficulty. "Help me. I'm scared." There was a plea in her eyes, but Igor looked away. He sat there, clenching his fists, and it was clear from his face that some kind of struggle was going on inside him. "The ambulance is on its way," the waiter said when he returned. 5 minutes maximum." Ina began to choke. She was gasping for air like a fish thrown ashore. Tatiana, unable to bear it, leaned over and took her hand. "Hold on, Ina. Help is close. I don't understand. What's going on?" Ina found it very difficult to speak. Everything was fine. Igor was silent, but his hands were shaking so much that he couldn't hold the glass. It was pouring into his face, and he kept looking around, as if looking for an escape route. Suddenly, Ina doubled over in convulsions. Her body was shaking with spasms, her eyes rolled back in her head. Tatiana recoiled in horror. She had never seen anything like it. "Oh my God," she whispered, "what have you done, Igor?" He turned to her abruptly, and in his eyes she saw not remorse, but anger. "I didn't do anything," he snapped. You change the plates yourself. These words sounded like a confession. Tatiana felt the earth slipping out from under her feet. So, he really wanted to poison her, his wife, the mother of his potential children, the woman who dedicated the best years of her life to him. At that moment, paramedics ran into the restaurant with a stretcher and a medical bag. Seeing Ina's condition, they immediately got to work. What did she eat? Did she drink? One of the medics quickly asked, checking her pulse and blood pressure. Ravioli, answered Tatiana. And a little wine. Are you allergic to anything? I don't know, admitted Tatiana. We are not very close. The paramedics administered some kind of drug, and it became a little easier for her to breathe, but her condition remained critical. It looks like poisoning, said the senior paramedic. And a severe one. We are taking her to the toxicology department immediately. Quote, when Ina was loaded onto the stretcher, she opened her eyes with difficulty and looked at Igor. Why? She whispered so quietly that only Tatiana, who was standing next to her, heard. Igor did not answer. He stood there, pursing his lips, and watched as he carried away the woman who could have died from the poison intended for his wife. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and the car, with its sirens on, sped through the night city, an oppressive silence fell over the restaurant. The patrons at the neighboring tables whispered about what had happened, casting curious glances in the direction of Tatiana and Igor. The restaurant manager approached their table with a concerned look. Sorry to disturb you, but could you please leave your contact information? It might be needed for the investigation. Quote. Igor raised his head sharply. What investigation? The woman felt ill. It happens. When people are taken to intensive care with suspected poisoning, an investigation is always carried out, the manager calmly explained. Standard procedure. Tatiana silently wrote down her information on a piece of paper. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from the rage that was slowly rising from within, displacing the shock. Igor also reluctantly gave his name and phone number. Can we go? He asked, clearly wanting to leave the restaurant as soon as possible. Of course, the manager nodded. The bill is on the table. Igor threw the money on the table without even counting it and headed for the exit. Tatiana followed him, feeling how with each step a cold determination grew in her. She knew that this evening would be the last in their marriage, but first she had to hear the truth. It was cool outside. Igor lit a cigarette, which he did extremely rarely, only in moments of extreme stress. His hands were shaking so much that he had difficulty hitting the cigarette with the lighter. Let's go home, he said without looking at his wife. No, Tatiana said quietly. Let's talk first. What to talk about? There had been an accident. An accident? Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. Igor, I saw you pouring something into my plate. He took a drag on his cigarette and exhaled for a long time, looking somewhere to the side. Did you imagine it? No, you didn't. And your reaction when we swapped plates with another one speaks for itself. Igor turned to her, and in his eyes she saw something new. Not love, not guilt, but the cold anger of a man who was caught red-handed. It's all your own fault, he said in a tone she had never heard before. Why did you have to swap plates? These words became the final confession. Tatiana felt something inside her finally break. The man she had trusted her entire life was cold-bloodedly planning her murder. What was that? She asked. What did you pour? Igor finished his cigarette and threw the butt into the trash can. None of your business, none of my business. Her voice shook with indignation. You wanted to kill me, and it's none of my business. I didn't want to kill anyone. He exploded. I just wanted you to fall asleep. Sound asleep. And then what? What were you going to do while I'm sleeping? Igor turned away, but Tatiana grabbed him by the sleeve and turned him towards her. Answer. What then? Take you home, put you to bed. And in the morning? In the morning, tell you that you didn't wake up, that your heart stopped in your sleep. The coldness with which he said these words horrified Tatiana more than the fact of the assassination attempt itself. It was not an impulsive impulse, but a well-thought-out plan. Why? She whispered. For what? Igor was silent for a moment, and then laughed, briefly and angrily. For the money, of course, for the insurance. $1 million for your death is a good amount to start a new life. A new life with a different one. With a different one. He no longer tried to hide the truth. We've been together for 6 months. She's young, beautiful, ambitious. Not like you, an aging housewife who only knows how to complain about life. Every word hit harder than a physical blow. Tatiana remembered all those evenings when she waited for him to come home from work, cooked dinner, asked about his affairs. All those years when she supported him in difficult times, rejoiced at his success, dreamed of their future together. 18 years, she whispered. I loved you for 18 years. So what? He shrugged. Love passes, but money remains. And if the plan had worked? If I really died, then everything would have been simpler. There was not a drop of regret in his voice. Ina would have gotten what she wanted, a husband with money. I would have gotten freedom and insurance. And you, wouldn't you suffer? I wouldn't suffer. Tatiana couldn't believe what she was hearing. Do you really think you'd do me a favor? Look at yourself. He gave her a disdainful look. 40 years old, no kids, so-so job. What do you have ahead of you? Old age alone. I had a life ahead of me with a husband I loved. The one you thought you loved, he corrected. You fell in love with an image I created. And you never needed the real me. Tatiana realized that she was standing in front of a stranger. The Igor she had married either never existed or had died somewhere along the way, giving way to this cold, cynical guy. And now what? She asked. Ina is in the hospital, possibly dying. Do you realize there will be an investigation? Ina will survive, he said with a confidence that seemed suspicious to Tatiana. The dose was calculated for you. She is larger and younger. She may be ill for a few days, but no more. Doses of what? Sleeping pills. A strong sleeping pill with additives. What additives? Igor paused, then grinned. And these are already professional secrets. Have you forgotten what field I work in? Pharmaceuticals. He had access to drugs, to preparations, the effects of which ordinary people had no idea. Perhaps something from those drugs that in large doses could stop the heart, but would look like natural death. Have you been planning this for a long time? Since he met another, he admitted without a shadow of shame. She immediately said that she does not get involved with married men for long. Either divorce or widowhood. And you chose widowhood. Divorce would have been more expensive. We would have had to divide property, pay alimony. But this way, clean money and no obligations. Tatiana looked at him and felt how the last remnants of love turned into contempt. This man traded her life like a commodity on the market. What if I refused to eat? What if I suspected something? I had a backup plan. He took a small bottle out of his pocket. Tasteless, odorless drops. Just a drop in your glass. The cold, methodical way he had thought it all out made Tatiana feel nauseous. How many times in the last few months could he have added something to her food or drink? Maybe those strange dizzinesses she had attributed to fatigue. What are you going to do now? She asked. The plan had failed. Igor thought about it, looking at the lights of the passing cars. We'll have to improvise, he said finally. Maybe a car accident or an accident at home. Do you seriously think I'm going to come home with you after everything I've heard? Quote. He looked at her, and something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Where will you go? You have no proof. Ina doesn't remember what she ate. There were no cameras above our table in the restaurant. I checked. But I know the truth. Your word against mine. He stepped closer. And I'll tell everyone what you've become lately. Depressed, hysterical, making up all sorts of stupid things. Tatiana realized that he was threatening her, and that he might actually try to implement the backup plan right now if he felt he was cornered. Igor, she said as calmly as she could. You understand that I can't just forget what I learned. You can. His voice became harsh. And you will, because otherwise he wouldn't finish the sentence, but the threat hung in the air. Tatiana realized that she was in mortal danger. The man who had already tried to kill her once would not hesitate to try again. Tatiana understood that every second of hesitation could cost her her life. Igor no longer hid his intentions, and in his eyes she saw the determination to see things through to the end at any cost. But she was not going to give up without a fight. Okay, she said, trying to sound submissive. Let's go home. I need to think this through. Quote. Igor looked at her carefully, trying to figure out if she was pretending or if she was truly ready to accept the situation. Smart girl, he chuckled. I always knew you'd figure out where you belong eventually. They walked to the car in silence. Igor got behind the wheel, and Tatiana settled into the passenger seat, feverishly thinking over her plan of action. She had a phone, but calling the police right now was dangerous. Igor could take it away or, even worse, cause an accident. On the way home, he glanced at her several times, checking her mood. Tatiana looked out the window and pretended to be deep in gloomy thought. In reality, she was planning her every move. Listen, Igor said as they stopped at a traffic light, I understand that you're upset, but think about it, why would you want to ruin what we have? We can continue living like before. Like before, quote. She turned to him. You wanted to kill me, Igor. How can I live with a man who planned my murder? I explained it. It was stupid. A moment of weakness. Ina turned my head, but now I understand that you are more important to me. Quote. The lie sounded so unconvincing that Tatiana did not even object. She simply nodded, making it clear that she was ready to listen to his version of events. When they reached the house, Igor opened the door and let his wife go first. Their two-story cottage in the suburbs had always seemed like a cozy refuge to Tatiana, but today it had turned into a trap. There were no neighbors nearby who could hear the cries for help. Would you like some tea? Igor suggested, heading for the kitchen. No, thank you, she answered quickly. After everything that had happened, she was not going to eat or drink anything from his hand. As you wish, he shrugged. Then I'll go take a shower. This evening had been tense. Tatiana nodded and headed to the living room, but as soon as she heard the water in the shower making noise, she rushed to the phone. At first she wanted to dial 911, but then changed her mind. She needed proof, not just evidence. Instead, she called her sister Elena. Tanya, you're calling so late, something happened. Her sister's voice sounded worried. Lena, listen to me carefully, Tatiana whispered. Write down everything I say. Igor tried to poison me today at the restaurant. What, are you kidding? I'm not kidding. He put something in my food, but I swapped plates with his lover. She was taken to the hospital. I'm home now, and he can try to do it again. Oh my God. Tanya, call the police. Now. I can't do this yet. I need proof. Write it down. Her name is Ina Lebedeva. She's in the hospital with food poisoning. The Tuscany restaurant is around 8 p.m. I'm writing it down. And what are you going to do if something happens to me, if I end up in the hospital or die under suspicious circumstances? Give this information to the police. It's all about the $1 million insurance policy. Tanya, get out of there. I can't do this right now. He won't let me. But I'll try to record his confession on my phone. The water in the shower stopped making noise. Tatiana quickly hung up and hid the phone in her jeans pocket, turning on the voice recording. Igor came downstairs in a robe, his hair still damp. He looked more relaxed, as if the hot shower had helped him calm down. "Feeling better?" Tatiana asked. "Much better." He sat down in the chair opposite her. "You know, I was thinking in the shower. Maybe we should take a vacation, go somewhere, forget about this whole nightmare." "What about Ina?" His face darkened for a moment. "Ina is no longer a problem. After what happened, she will understand that it is better to stay away from family men." "Do you think she will not suspect something strange in her poisoning?" "And what could she suspect? That someone wanted to poison my wife, and poisoned her? Sounds like nonsense." Igor was clearly getting into the swing of it, telling about his plan. Tatiana realized that he needed an audience, someone who would appreciate his genius. "Tell me more," she asked. "How did you plan it all? Why do you need to know? I'm just curious. You said that I should understand where my place is. Quote. I want to understand who I really live with." Igor smiled contentedly. His vanity got the better of his caution. "I started planning 3 months ago," he began. "First, I studied the effects of various drugs, then chose the optimal combination. A sleeping pill plus a muscle relaxant plus a substance that in large doses causes cardiac arrest." "And where did you get it?" "At work. I have access to experimental drugs. Officially, they are being disposed of, but who checks? And I took out insurance 6 months ago. I told you that it was a corporate program, and then I paid the extra money to get $1 million. He laughed. "You didn't even read the documents, you just signed where I told you." Tatiana remembered that day. Igor really did bring some papers, said that it was a profitable insurance from the company. She trusted him and signed without going into the details. "What, son? Did she know about your plans?" "Of course, she even helped work out the details. We rehearsed several times how she should come to the restaurant, what to say, how to behave." "So she was an accomplice?" "Of course. Do you think I could have pulled off such a thing without support?" The phone in Tatiana's pocket continued to record. Every word Igor said was a confession of a murder plot. "And if I hadn't agreed to have dinner at the restaurant, then it would have been more difficult, but not impossible. You can have an accident at home too. A slippery bathtub, a blow to the head, a gas leak." He spoke about it so calmly, as if discussing plans for the weekend. Tatiana realized that a real psychopath was sitting in front of her, capable of killing for money and not feeling the slightest remorse. "And now what?" she asked. Since the first plan had failed, Igor thought, looking at her. "Now everything is more complicated. Ina is in the hospital. There might be an investigation. It takes time for everything to calm down. And how much time are you giving me? And that depends on you." Steely notes appeared in his voice. "If you behave sensibly, keep quiet and don't cause problems, you can live for a few more months. But if you try to go to the police or tell someone..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat was clear. At that moment his phone rang. Igor glanced at the screen and frowned. "Hospital," he said, "probably about Ina." He answered the call, and Tatiana heard a man's voice on the other end, but she couldn't make out the words. Igor's face gradually changed. At first he looked worried, then scared. "I see," he said finally. "Thank you for the information. What happened?" Quote. Tatiana asked. "Ina is in intensive care. Her condition is serious." And he paused. "The doctors found traces of powerful drugs in her blood. They suspect deliberate poisoning." Tatiana felt both relief and fear. Relief that Ina was alive, and fear from the realization that Igor was now cornered and could become even more dangerous. "That changes things," he muttered. If there is an investigation, you will be arrested, finished Tatiana. Igor, surrender. Admit everything before it is too late. He looked up at her sharply, and she saw the fury in his eyes. Surrender. After everything I had put into this plan, he stood up and began to pace the room. No, if I go to trial, I will drag you down with me. Me? For what? And who changed the plates? Who really poisoned Ina? Tatiana realized that he was going to put all the blame on her, but she had a recording of their conversation that proved his guilt. Igor, she said as calmly as possible, think rationally, you need help. You can't run from justice your whole life. Quote. We'll see, he grinned maliciously. In the meantime, you will not leave here. He headed for the front door and turned the key, locking them both in the house. Then he pulled out the key and hid it in his robe pocket. What are you doing? Keeping you safe, he said with a mocking smile. Until I figure out what to do next, you're staying here. Tatiana realized that she had become a plenitsa in her own home, but she had a recording, she had a phone, and most importantly, she had the will to live. She was not going to give up. The next morning, when Igor fell asleep in a chair from fatigue and stress, Tatiana quietly climbed out the window of the first-floor bedroom. She got to the neighboring house and called the police. An hour later, the house was surrounded. Igor was arrested without resistance. He knew the game was over. The recording on Tatiana's phone became the key evidence of his guilt. The investigation lasted 6 months. During this time, Ina fully recovered and gave detailed testimony about her participation in the conspiracy. It turned out that she, too, had no idea about Igor's real intentions. He convinced her that he was only planning to scare his wife into agreeing to a divorce. Igor received 15 years in prison for attempted murder. Ina received a suspended sentence of 3 years for complicity. The divorce was quick. They had to sell the house to pay for the lawyer's services, but Tatiana did not regret it. She moved to a small apartment in the city center and got a new job in a design studio. The first months were difficult. Nightmares tormented her at night. During the day, she constantly looked around, afraid to see a familiar face. A psychotherapist helped her cope with the trauma and believed that life could be wonderful without the person who betrayed her trust. A year later, Tatiana met Mikhail, a kind, honest man who worked as a doctor in the same hospital where Ina was treated. He knew her whole story, but it did not frighten him. On the contrary, he admired her courage and strength of spirit. On the day they got married, Tatiana stood by Zax's window and looked out at the sunny street. At 41, she was starting a new life, honest, open, built on trust and true love. Igor took 18 years from her, but he couldn't take away her future. What are you thinking about? Mikhail asked, hugging her shoulders. That the most terrible moments in life sometimes become the beginning of the happiest ones. She answered, smiling through tears of joy. And it was the truth. She survived, she was free, and real life was waiting for her ahead. Thank you for listening to the story. This was the Twists of Fate channel with you. Sorry for the mistakes. Write in the comments what you think. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel.